Hi. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks. I have a quick announcement about the previous exam, and I've gotten a lot of emails about the regrade process. So just so it's clear to everyone, regrade requests, you can submit a regrade if you want. Just so you're aware, the entire exam will be subject to a regrade. And unless there is a very clear error, it's unlikely to result in a change in your grade. But if you want to submit a regrade request, there is a form on the course iSite under the exam button. You should print that out and then go meet with your TF. You need to meet with your TF to go over your exam and have him or her sign the form. And then you can give the whole packet to your TF by Friday, or you can give it to me at lecture on Wednesday. But I would seriously, unless you think there was a very clear error in how your exam was graded, I would seriously consider whether or not to submit a regrade, because the entire exam will be subject to a regrade. If you want to meet with me about it, I have office hours later this week. You can sign up on the calendar on the iSite. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe. So we've gotten a lot more formal about stuff like that since the class has grown in size. You know, when I first started teaching the class, we had 40, then 100, then 200 kids. But with 400 students or 430 students, we just have to be much more formal with paperwork and procedures. So, I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm glad to see everyone back from vacation. I was just talking to some students over here who had a good time. Yeah, exactly, over their break. Okay, so we have interesting things to talk about today. Last time we sort of began to talk about income inequality, and we discussed different ways of measuring inequality, and we kind of punched home the point that inequality is an intrinsically collective property of groups. It's not something that adheres to individuals or inheres in individuals. We speak of groups having inequality, not individuals having inequality. We examined the effect of income inequality on health at both the individual and collective levels. We saw some initial data on this point. And we began to consider some of the mechanisms of this effect, including the possibility of social comparison or hierarchy. So obviously, in a situation in which there's no income inequality, even if people are comparing themselves to each other, there's no variance, so there's no invidious comparison to be had. But when there is inequality, then you can begin to develop hierarchical organizations of human beings. And so we'd introduced some possible explanations that could link income inequality to individual health. We talked a little bit about the sort of the neo-material environment explanation, things that happen around individuals, different social spending by governments, neglect of the common environment or the commons. If there's a highly unequal society, people might be less willing or able or interested to kind of protect the collective good, underinvestment in human capital, lower social capital. This is a property also of groups distinct from inequality, which we'll come back to in a few lectures, and is one of my favorite ideas that we'll be discussing in the course. I've alluded to it repeatedly, and we're going to eventually get to the payoff. A second category of explanations that might link income inequality to health is the psychosocial environment explanations, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. So one possibility is a kind of direct physiological effects. So something about inequality in your surroundings is stressful to you and affects some physiologic properties or processes within your body. And another is some kind of direct psychological effect that arises from your relative deprivation relative to other individuals in the community around you. And finally, there was the individual income explanation, which is how we finished the last lecture, which argued a little bit about how this effects of income inequality on health could be sort of an artifact having to do with the curvilinear relationship between health and income at the individual level. And very crudely, we kind of partition these to be sort of effects outside people's bodies and effects inside people's bodies of inequality. So we have inequality, it's going to affect health. How does it do that? Well, maybe inequality leads to different policies, different public policies, that's outside people's bodies, and then maybe that leads to ill health. Or we have inequality, maybe that leads to sort of psychological or physiological responses inside people's bodies, and maybe that leads to ill health. So outside versus inside, neo-material versus psychosocial. And of course, these mechanisms can reinforce each other and may operate at different levels, and this is another key idea from these 2 to 3 lectures. These can operate at different levels of geographic aggregation. So for example, maybe the neo-material aspects, have to do with the whole state at which you live in, involving millions of people and how they make decisions, whereas the psychosocial environment might have to do with like just your cluster of friends, or the block on which you live, or your classmates, Or you might be comparing yourself to the people you know in this classroom, let's say, but you're affected by public policies set by Drew Faust about how we air condition the room, for example, over which you have no control. Now, the reduction that we discussed at the end of last lecture, the reduction in income inequality via income transfers. Remember, we talked about how you could take money from people at the top of the curve and transfer them to people at the bottom. So we said, okay, if you take, some Y amount of dollars from this individual, so he or she becomes less wealthy by this amount to this individual, their health will decline by some little amount here. But then if you transfer the money to this individual, so they improve their income by this amount, their health will improve by some much more significant amount. So income transfers from the rich to the poor, while they keep the mean income the same in the population, can affect the mean health and improve the mean health. And the reason for this is that the relationship is nonlinear. If it were linear, then transferring $100 from a rich person to a poor person would reduce the mean income would not change the mean income, nor would it change the mean health. But there's something else that we didn't talk about the last time that could also be happening in this situation. Because another way that reducing income inequality might improve the health of a population at the population level would be that such a reduction in inequality might move the whole curve up. That is, something about living in a context with less inequality might change the whole set point of the wealth-health relationship. Thus, the green curve might be Sweden, and the orange curve might be the United States, and for a given income, everyone fares better in Sweden. Okay? So this curve, the frontier, has been moved up here. This curve has been moved up. So when you have more equality in income, maybe the curve moves up for everybody. So it's not just where individuals move along the curve, it's where the whole curve can be reset potentially by inequality. And here, for illustrative purposes, might be Ghana, for example, which has even more inequality than the United States. So the argument that income inequality, the argument is that income inequality can work to actually move the curve up or down altogether, and not just move individuals along it. So now the question becomes, what might be the mechanisms by which income inequality might shift the curve up and down? And we talked the last time about neo-material mechanisms, and we'll be discussing psychosocial ones today. Now, hierarchy and inequality, especially if long-standing and cumulative, can affect individuals' health. And indeed, the point is that hierarchy has always mattered because it did when we evolved in the first place. So it's not a sudden discovery that human beings, or a sudden fact of life, that human beings are affected by hierarchy, let's say even in modern times, let alone historical times. But actually, since time immemorial, our species has been attuned to and affected by notions of status and hierarchy within our groups. And part of the reason that a minimum amount of income is not enough to efface hierarchy, so it's not enough if we give everyone, $100,000, and you think, oh, well, that's just enough for everyone to buy what they need in terms of their basic necessities, that should eliminate the impact of inequality on health. It's not like a step function like we saw the last time. We saw a number of possible relationships between income or wealth and health, and we saw it was not a step function. Part of the reason it's not a step function is that there still will be hierarchy, and that this hierarchy will still affect people. And the reason for that is, in turn, that people have a hierarchy of needs. It's not enough to just satisfy their basic needs. And in fact, these needs can be arrayed in what is in the famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And these needs are important because they help shed light on why the health socioeconomic status relationship is in fact not a step function. So if you arrange human beings' needs of different sorts, this is a very well-known way of doing it. At the bottom, we have physical needs, the need for air, water, food, exercise, rest, freedom from disease, and so forth. Then there's security needs, for safety, shelter, and stability. And now we begin to get to a little bit of more subtle needs, like social needs, the need for being loved, belonging, and inclusion. And then Maslow argued that there are ego needs, the need for self-esteem, power, recognition, and prestige. And these needs are met through achievement, recognition, promotions, and let's say bonuses. And finally, at the top, he put self-actualization, the need for development and creativity, and these needs are met through autonomy and achievement. So For example, when you're in Washington, D.C., and you get on the subway at the metro, and you ride the subway from one end to the other end, just 12 miles from Metro D.C. to Montgomery County, Maryland, as you're traveling underneath, the life expectancy of the individuals above you on the surface of the planet changes dramatically. So at one end, you have poor black men whose median life expectancy is 57 years, and at the other end, you have rich white men whose life expectancy is 77 years. So you get over a year, 1.5 years of extra life expectancy for every mile you travel underground for the people that are living on the surface. And this difference between these 12-mile movement and the life expectancy of these two populations really cannot be explained by societies not meeting the physical needs of the people at the bottom, okay? All the people in that area, by and large, have adequate physical and security needs are being met, okay? So it's not that the people are starving in central Washington, D.C., that's causing them to live less long. Something else is going on that's leading to this differential survival, differential health in the population as you move from point to point. And it turns out that there are more needs than those that can be acquired by having enough income to avoid poverty. And in particular, people have needs for autonomy, psychological integrity, and integration into society. And these are key needs, as we're going to see. And so, in fact, there's a social gradient in health, even when we move beyond meeting the lowest needs of people, even after we correct the problem of the lack of food and water. And this may have something to do, this differential survival and differential health may have something to do with whether these other needs are met. And this may be why, even as people's material needs are met, we still observe a hierarchy in health status. Now, failure to meet these needs may work by leading to metabolic and endocrine changes that in turn place people at risk for disease and death. And there are fundamental processes related to autonomy and social integration that play a role here, and these processes are socially stratified so that those at the top of the hierarchy have more ability to meet more of these needs, and those at the bottom have less ability to meet those needs. And of course, testing for causation is difficult here as usual. Now let's look at just some basic biology a bit, and then we'll get to some more fun stuff later in the talk today. Groups of animals, social animals such as ourselves, primates, often maintain hierarchies that involve dominance, which in turn can produce marked inequalities in access to particular kinds of resources, which in turn can reinforce the hierarchy. For example, one recent report looked at where in a tree different animals would position themselves. And it turns out that the top primates in this particular species were higher up in the tree. So, you would think, oh, well, that's sort of interesting, weird, metaphoric. They're higher up in the tree. What difference could it make how high up you are in the tree? Well, of course, turns out that higher up in the fruit on the tree get more sunlight and therefore have more nutrients. And so the food that those primates that are higher up eat is better for them. So something about the position in the tree affects, in this primate species, access to resources, in this case, the nutritive value of the foodstuffs that they consume. But sociability is often a counterbalance to the stressfulness of such hierarchy. So many primate species have evolved the ability to be sociable with each other to kind of mitigate some of the effects of a hierarchical organization or the existence of hierarchy between members of the species. And you can kind of get a picture of that by contrasting the left-hand images from the right-hand images, the kind of more collegial interactions we see on the A and B compared to the more sort of violent interactions we see between C and D. And many of these effects are connected to basic sociobiological ideas. As evolutionary biologist Richard Alexander has pointed out, the primary hostile force faced by our ancestors was other ancestors of ours, right? The main thing that has killed human beings since time immemorial is not saber-toothed tigers, for the love of God. It's each other. We are the ones that are the primary predators of ourselves. And because we all share the same basic needs with other members of our species, those other members are both the most feared competitors and the most likely associates. And those competitors can be, in fact, very threatening. They can be a source of friendship, support, and cooperation as well. And it can therefore be adaptive, evolutionarily speaking, to form groups. That is, conflict is a constant possibility, and the potential threat of other members of our species a constant presence in our evolutionary landscape. And this has shaped, no doubt, the evolution of behaviors that we evince with respect to sociality and our responses to hierarchy and the fact that others might threaten us. So we may think of two contrasting ways to organize human populations. There's a kind of dominance hierarchy way we could organize them, and a kind of friendship equality way we could organize them. And both of these have left their marks on our bodies and on our behavior, because we've had these contrasting ways of thinking about how to organize groups forever. Now, I don't mean to suggest some deep-seated biological basis for particular political systems, but I do want to highlight the fact that we should not be surprised to find that social organization might become embodied, literally, and hence affect the health of individuals. That we shouldn't be surprised to find that our bodies are attuned to these phenomena of hierarchy, and that we respond to them, and that we biologize these social experiences that we have. And let me just give you one example. So as many of you probably know, the fight or flight response, which you all studied in high school, involves all kinds of responses of our body to threat. You know, your ears cock forward so you can hear sounds. Your pupils widen so you get more light. Blood flow shifts, to your skeletal muscle so you can run or engage in activities. But what you may also have learned or have forgotten is that your body also pumps out fibrinogen, which is a precursor to fibrin, which is crucial for clotting. Why would your body do that when you're facing a threat? Well, you're preparing to be attacked and injured. So if you are cut or bloodied, your body can clot and respond to this assault. Now, it turns out, and this can then minimize blood loss if you get into a fight and you can proceed to be victorious against your opponent. And among various species of primates, and presumably among our ancestors, the most common attacks were, of course, other members of our own species, when dominant members of the species attacked subordinates. But it turns out that higher levels of fibrinogen have often been found in junior office workers in the British civil service. Now, we don't think in the British civil service they're like attacking each other in Whitehall, right? But our bodies carry with us these marks of how you respond to stress. And the lower rung members of the species had higher levels of fibrinogen, both in the primates studied and in this well-to-do British employed population of civil servants in Whitehall. So, and the irony here is that this is maladaptive, these high levels of fibrinogen, because what it can result in is this fibrinogen can lead to clotting, not when you've been attacked, but just other times, for example, in your coronary arteries. And you can be more likely to have heart attacks as a result of inappropriate clotting at the wrong time in the wrong place, rather than the right time in the right place. So hierarchy and inequality, especially if long-standing and cumulative, can affect individuals' health. And in fact, the point, as I already mentioned, is that hierarchy still matters because it mattered when we evolved in the first place. Now, stressors can be of various kinds and elicit various bodily responses. One of the classic definitions is that a physical stressor is an external challenge to the homeostasis, to the way we regulate and keep our body in balance. And a psychosocial stressor is the anticipation, justified or not, that a challenge to homeostasis can loom. And psychosocial stressors typically engender feelings of lack of control or lack of predictability and a sense of lacking outlets for the frustration caused by the stressor. Now, both types of stressors, physical and psychosocial, activate an array of endocrine and neural adaptations. Now, one of the things that's really important about stress is that we adapt to it because our nervous system was set up in this way. And I asked you earlier in the semester, whether you are aware of your socks being on right now. And you guys said, no, you're not aware of your socks. But you were aware of them when you put them on in the morning. So your nervous system no longer is informing you that your socks are on. And think of another example. Let's say, raise your hands if you're afraid of spiders. Okay, so imagine I took one of you afraid of a spider, and I brought you here, and I handcuffed your hand to this desk, and I took a big, gross, hairy spider, and I put it in the palm of your hand, and you couldn't move, and you had to look at it. Okay, what would be your response? Yeah, you'd be freaking out, and your heart rate would go up, and your respiratory rate would go up, and your pupils would widen, and your fibrinogen would be pumped, and you would be completely batshit. I mean, you'd be looking at this thing, and you would not like it, okay? Now, would you stay that way for the rest of your life? No. What happens? after a while, even though you freaked out initially, typically after about 20 or 30 minutes, you no longer respond that way, even though the spider is still there on your hand. So your bodies have are constituted in such a fashion that you adapt to and respond to these external stressors that you might face. But it turns out that the chronic and repetitive activation of the stress response by chronic psychosocial stressors, such as being in constant close proximity to an anxiety-producing member of our own species, can increase the risk for numerous diseases or exacerbate such pre-existing diseases as hypertension, atherosclerosis, diabetes, immune suppression, reproductive impairments, and so forth. Basically, being low rank and being forced to be next to that arachnoid member of your roommate is going to repeatedly activate your stress response and become biologized in your body because of these archaic systems that we inherited. Low rank can be stressful. And as Angus Deaton, a Princeton economist, put it, the degree to which low rank is harmful to an individual is likely to depend on the number of people of higher rank, because each such person is in a position to deliver the threats, insults, and forced obeisance or ultimate violence that generates stress. Individuals who are insulted by those immediately above them insult those immediately below them, generating a cascade of threats and violence through which low-ranked individuals feel the burden, not just of their immediate superiors, but of the whole hierarchy above them. Just like in physics, when you learn about a packet of water at the bottom of the ocean, there's a column that goes all the way to the surface, which results in how many hundreds of atmospheres of pressure on the little packet of water at the bottom. So typically, lower ranks or statuses convey more stress. And the lower you are, the more stressful it is. Now, here are just some of the ways that different parts of your body respond. This is sort of LS1A kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into it, but your adrenal gland, your testes, your ovary, your heart, your brain, your immune system, your body responds to these stresses by doing different physiologic, immunologic, or hormonal things. But the important thing to recognize, since we've just been introducing this notion of hierarchy and rank, is that rank or status is a relative, not an absolute concept. Therefore, a link between status and health suggests the importance of relative standing for health. And it's very hard to eliminate relative standing, partly because it seems to be biologically hardwired, and partly because a natural lottery is inherent in our species. So here are the ideas that we can't eliminate the source of hierarchical stress in our society, because we're all born, because of the natural lottery, to occupy different positions. So humans have very clear ideas about their relative standing and what it means to be relatively deprived of desirable attributes or goods. Here is a canonical formulation by W.G. Runciman from 1966. Here's what he says. We can roughly say that a person is relatively deprived of X when 1, he does not have X, 2, he sees some other persons as having X, 3, he wants X, and 4, he sees it as feasible that he should have X. And note how even this formulation immediately calls forth questions about social justice. So as soon as we now start thinking about hierarchy and its effects, we are sort of inexorably led to all kinds of moral questions we've been touching on repeatedly this semester. So let's look at some results from humans taken from your readings. So here is the classic social status ladder, the kind of measurement system that was introduced by Marmot and his colleagues to kind of begin to think about how we could get people to identify where they are on the social state, on the hierarchy. So it says, think of this ladder as representing where people stand in our society. At the top of the ladder are the people who are the best off, those who have the most money, most education, and best jobs. At the bottom are the people who are the worst off, those who have the least money, least education, and worst jobs or no job. Place an X on the rung that best represents where you stand on the ladder. So here the ladder is anchored at 10 and at 1, and best off and worst off, and the person is supposed to put an X where they stand. And by doing that, they kind of mark themselves where they are on the hierarchy. And what's interesting is that results like these. So this is some data taken from Michael's group, from Michael Marmot's group. This is self-perceived status on the ladder and prevalence of health problems in male British civil servants. Okay, so these are people, rich people in England, okay, who have the National Health Service. They have access to terrific health care. And they're not deprived. They're not impoverished. They're not deprived of food or shelter, okay? but we're now going to look at where they are on the ladder is associated with various outcomes. So here's their subjective status rank on the ladder, and here is the prevalence of angina, for example. So individuals at the top have a lower prevalence, and individuals at the bottom have a higher prevalence. And individuals with diabetes, the same story. Respiratory disease, the same story. Depression, the same story. At the top, maybe 10% are depressed. At the bottom, nearly half. And here's self-perceived health status, or perceived health by some other measure as well. But the interesting thing is not that it's different, the top versus the bottom. The interesting thing is that there's a continuous gradient all the way along. So every little increment along the ladder is associated with some change in your risk of having these biological problems within your body. So these results show two things. First, that subjective social standing is important. And second, that there's a continuous gradient in numerous health measures according to this kind of social standings. But they don't clarify the causal order, of course. We don't know whether it's these health problems that cause the subjective status rank, remember we've been discussing this, or the subjective status rank that cause the health problems. Nevertheless, they are powerful indicators that the relationship between social status and health is not a step function. And data such as this, with which we're quite familiar, shows that being poor is associated with greater mortality. And no doubt, being very poor is bad for one's health, but this figure also shows a gradient yet again. So here's annual income, and here's age-adjusted mortality among white United States men. And it keeps going. I mean, no matter how much more money you get, you keep getting better and better and better health. So it's not as if once you cross some minimum threshold, all of a sudden your health improves. It's a continuous gradient across the whole spectrum. There's a difference between earning $500,000 and $300,000, just like there's a difference between earning $50,000 and $30,000 in this type of situation. But why should there be such a difference? Why shouldn't there be a step function, which we discussed the last time? Well, there are a number of possible explanations, and which we've begun to think about. There's relative differences in status might translate into absolute differences in life chances via affecting two key items of human needs. So how is it the case that you can have this type of continuous gradient? Well, maybe it is that as you get more and more status, it allows you to fill higher and higher needs on Maslow's hierarchy. And the fulfillment of those needs then improves your health. And two of the needs which we're going to talk about are autonomy and social integration. As economist Amartya Sen points out, it may not be what one has that is important, it may be what one can do with what one has that is important. Hence, a person's relative position on a scale of income may translate into an absolute position on what Amartya calls capabilities. So even though poor people in the United States may have many times the wealth of those in other countries, they still have shorter lives because they cannot do as much, because they suffer from a lack of autonomy or social integration, because they are less able to meet the higher needs on Maslow's list, even though they have absolutely more money than poor people in some other country or in some other place within our own country. In other words, it may not be one's position in the social hierarchy per se that is the problem. It may be what the position means for what the person can do in a given environment that is material. It is the extent to which position affects opportunities for autonomy and social participation. Now, this link can perhaps be broken by compensating for hierarchy, by equalizing, even if we cannot eliminate the consequences of hierarchy, and by counterbalancing the natural and the social lottery, as we've discussed before. For example, lower status can lead to low participation in social interactions and less reciprocity in those interactions, and these are associated with worse health. But social participation is not merely something that high-status individuals acquire or make for themselves. Societies can, as a whole, foster or control the amount of social participation that's possible within the individuals in that group. And this, in turn, leads to other sorts of ideas about how we might, if we wished, remake or reorient our society so as not to eliminate hierarchy, but so as to attenuate some of the adverse effects that hierarchy has on people's health and their bodies. The way many societies are organized can lead high-status individuals to be better able to tap what sort of social capital is available and to reap higher returns on that capital. So let me punch this point home in a couple of ways with you guys today. Here's some illustrations of this point. Okay, so I'm going to give you all a choice. You're going to have to raise your hands. So you can either pick A or B. In situation A, your current annual income is $50,000, but others earn $25,000. Everyone else around you earns 25 grand. Or in B, your current annual income is $100,000, but everyone else around you earns $250,000. Does everyone understand the choice?
What about inflation?
No inflation, and we're going to have purchasing power parity. Okay, so you're stuck in these worlds. You can pick world A or B. Which do you choose? I already said, there's equal purchasing power in A and B. Some previous Harvard undergrad asked this question years ago. That's why that was added to the slide. So A or B, raise your hands if you'd rather be in world A. Raise your hands if you'd rather be in world B. Okay, so the majority of you, which is typical of previous years, so in yellow are the results that were published by Solnick and Hemingway in a study that they did, and in orange is last year's undergrads, 81%, just like this year's, said they'd rather be in world A than in B. So all of you made what in classical economics would be seen as a completely irrational decision. You chose to have $50,000 in annual income rather than $100,000. You all preferred to make less money, absolutely be impoverished or less wealthy, because you wanted to be relatively well off compared to other individuals. Okay, well, let's now consider another possibility. So in world A, your physical attractiveness is a 6, and everyone else is a 4. And in world B, your physical attractiveness is an 8, and everyone around you is a 10. Okay? So raise your hands if you'd rather be in world A. World B? Okay, so a more extreme distribution than the last time. Actually, last year it was like this. So these are the results from Solnick and Hemingway, and these are our Harvard undergraduates. Why? Raise your hands. Who chose world A? Okay, why did you pick world A?
Well, there's kind of a relative gains problem if you think about mating.
Yeah?
Like being relatively more attractive is much more important than being attractive, period.
Okay, so that's why you chose A. Who chose B? Yeah, why'd you pick B?
Everyone else is just that much more beautiful.
Okay, so he wants to have sex with nicer looking people. You just want to have sex. Okay, but we're zeroing in on some of the crucial differences in these types of things. Other thoughts on this? Yeah?
At least in world A, girls have so many things available to them to make them from 6s to 10s.
You think they can actually intervene? All right, thank you. But I'm saying let's stick with the assumption you're stuck. You can't intervene. You have to do that. Okay, here's another example now. Pay attention. In world A, you have 4 weeks of annual vacation and everyone else around you has 5. And in world B, you have 3 weeks of annual vacation and everyone else around you has 2. Okay, now who picks world A? Who picks world B? Really? I'm stunned. This is last year's results again. I'm sorry, I'm not stunned. I'm stunned at this gentleman here, who I'm going to call on in just a minute to explain his thinking. So 92% of people pick world A, and only 8% of people, just one guy. Why did you pick world B? Okay, well, all right. Okay, anyone else? Why is he wrong? Why'd you pick world? Someone, tell me why'd you pick? Why'd you pick world, other one?
Because that way you have more overall vacation, and you can do more with your time if you have 4 weeks.
Okay, so that's exactly right. But what's the difference between this example and the previous examples? What's the difference between these examples? Yeah.
Vacation, like, it's much easier to imagine that there's actually purchasing power parity than
No. Another example. Another explanation. Yeah.
someone else's, like, length of time vacation doesn't impact you as much.
Exactly. So how much vacation other people have doesn't affect the enjoyment you can derive from your own vacation. But how much attractiveness other people have or how much money other people have can affect the satisfaction that you can enjoy from having those goods. So vacation days, while vacation days like money and appearance are desirable, having more vacation than others doesn't confer any competitive advantages. So there's a difference in different kinds of resources with respect to what they do for our capabilities. So let's go back to the ladder. So here's a ladder again. Who would rather be A and who would rather be B? Raise your hands if you'd rather be A. This is not a trick question. Raise your hands if you'd rather be B. If you raise your hand again, I'll be really concerned. Okay, so everyone would rather be A. It's a kind of a normal situation. How about this situation? Would you rather be A or D? Who would rather be A? Who would rather be D? Why would you rather be D? What? No, A and D are on the same line. Say that again? Never mind. Well, no, someone who can construct an argument for why you'd rather be D? Yeah.
You have the opportunity to improve to C.
Okay, you have the opportunity to improve to C. That's one idea. Okay, good. I like that idea. Yeah?
Also, you're living in a better off society. So if your society has relatively more money, there might be less crime, less pollution, that sort of thing.
Okay, very good. So that's another reason. So we've got 2 reasons so far you'd rather be D. Another is like the society's better. What's the third reason? Or another reason? Anyone else have any ideas? Yeah?
I guess like considering that like the end of the ladder is like sort of like the very bottom of your ladder, then you can't go any worse than that. So and even like at your level, you're still better off than
Okay.
everyone else on the other ladder.
Okay, good. So she's reframing the thing that you said, which is you have an opportunity to go up. She's saying, well, actually, you can't fall any worse off. A third possibility is that, yeah? Your network could include C. We'll come back to that. That's a really subtle idea, network. But the other idea is that there must be some of you that are altruists. Some of you must derive happiness in knowing that everyone else is better off than you, right? It's, if you're in D, you can think, well, all these other people have this wonderful life, even if I don't have it. No one raised that idea. That's worrisome. So that might be another reason you might prefer D to A. But generally speaking, by and large, people prefer A to D. Now what would you pick, A or E? So think for a moment. Would you rather be A or E? Raise your hands if you'd rather be A. Raise your hands if you'd rather be E. All right, so this some of you and most of you didn't vote on this one. And of course, I could move E up on the ladder and get an indifference point where you would trade off, everyone following me now? You would trade off absolute standing versus relative standing, right? So at some point, I would say, okay, even though you're lower on the rung on the second ladder, E is always below C, nevertheless, now I've given you enough absolute earning or income that you'd rather be in that world than in the first world. And finally, you can imagine this situation where we have a different kind of ladder which now has F. And I could ask you, but I won't, whether you'd rather be A, D, or F, and you guys would have some opinions. And sort of not surprisingly, these are the way these countries kind of stack up. You can have, Ghana, United States, or Sweden. And what Sweden has done is compress the spread in the ladder from the top rung to the bottom rung. Now let's look at some additional evidence of this. One hypothesis flowing from the observations that we made earlier about the biology of hierarchy and stress in primates is that relative deprivation will matter to an individual's health. And the idea, again, is that it's not so much one's absolute deprivation, if any, that matters, but rather one's relative deprivation. Now, relative deprivation can be defined in the following sorts of way. Low income or status, so relative deprivation is low income or status relative to a reference group can affect health. And RD is the difference between your own income, or some other measure, Y sub I, and the average reference group income, given that that income is greater than Y sub I. So the important idea here is that relative deprivation is an upward-looking, individual level measure that depends on the incomes of others. So the richer the reference group, the higher your relative deprivation. So if I take you out of here and put you in some billionaire's ball, for almost all of you, then everyone else's income, your relative deprivation will have gone up, even though you're the same human being. Second, RD describes an individual standing, and it's different for each member of the group. This is a very important idea. Well, it's not like the most important idea in the course, but it's an important idea for today. It's different for every member of the group. And finally, note that inequality is the same for the entire group because it describes a distribution of income. So if I computed the income inequality in this room, that income inequality would be a quantity that describes the whole collective of you, and each of you would face the same income inequality as a structural feature of your environment. But your relative deprivation would be different for every one of you. each of you would have a different number, just like you have a unique income. Each of you, I could compute for each of you, how relatively deprived are you given the distribution of the incomes around you. So here's the math. You don't have to memorize this math, but let me just walk you through it, and we'll provide the slides. Here's the math for one measure of relative deprivation called the Yatsaki index. And so what you do in the Yatsaki index is for person I with income yi, who is part of a reference group with n people, you compute the difference between everyone above him. You order the people from top to bottom. You see for you, who among this group has more income than you. And then I subtract your income versus his income, and your income versus her income, and your income versus his income. And I do that for only those individuals that are wealthier than you. And then I sum across all those differences, and this is for all yj greater than y sub I, and I divide by n, which is the number in the entire room, not just the number of people that are above you. So this n is for the whole population, not just for the size of the reference group that's above you. And this dividing by n ensures that the relative deprivation is invariant to the size of the reference group. Otherwise, if n doubled, the relative deprivation would double. So Warren Buffett, for example, is not relatively deprived of billions compared to Bill Gates, but he's deprived of, well, when Bill had more money than when Warren, which I think is still true. So Warren Buffett is not Warren Buffett does not look up at Bill Gates and say, oh my goodness, I'm in a calamitous situation. I have billions of dollars less than Bill Gates. You take the difference between Warren and Bill and divide it by 300 million people in the United States. So now the difference between the two of them becomes much smaller. That's how relatively deprived Warren is compared to Bill. And here's some examples giving the relative deprivation denominated in units of dollars for people with different incomes and with reference groups chosen by location and age. So now we're going to say, we're going to pick your reference group to be other 20 to 25-year-olds who live in Boston. Or we're going to pick your reference group to be other Harvard undergraduates compared to, MIT undergraduates or something. So here we're going to look now at the relative deprivation of these individuals. So these are examples of relative deprivation, and the reference group is the area you live, like Hidalgo or New York, and the age group. And here's your income. So if you earn $25,000 and you're 21 to 25 years old and you live in Hidalgo, Texas, you're relatively deprived in $4,725. But if you live in New York, you have a higher relative deprivation. It's $17,374. So you all have the intuition that it's better to earn $25,000 in Hidalgo than it is to earn 25 grand in New York City. But now you can quantify, well, how exactly does it affect your standing with respect to the hierarchy in the community? And you can do that for all of these incomes. And what you can see from this is that to have equal relative deprivation, you'd have to earn $100,000 in New York would give you the same approximate relative deprivation as $25,000 in Hidalgo, okay? So the point here is that we can quantify how deprived are you compared to the population. Where do you stand on the social hierarchy? So one standing in the hierarchy is roughly the same if you earn $25,000 in Hidalgo or 100 grand in New York if you're 25. And the reason is that you can do about as much with $25,000 in Hidalgo as you can do with 100 grand in New York in terms of one's capabilities, translating this rank to what you're capable of doing given this income. Is that clear? Yeah.
So does this mean that earning $100,000 in New York has a similar health outcome, or at least scaled health outcome?
Yes.
$25,000?
Yes. We're going to get to that in a moment. That's the argument that we're going to make, exactly. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get some kind of dollar denominated. It doesn't need to be dollar denominated. It is in this case. Way of assessing, well, where do you stand in the hierarchy? How relatively deprived are you? Yeah, because it's not an absolute standing that matters is the argument here. Yeah, you can be top dog in Hidalgo. Is anyone here from Hidalgo by any chance? Or near Hidalgo? Has anyone been to Hidalgo? Well, so I'll give you $25,000 to go to Hidalgo. Yeah, someone else had a point to make? No. Okay. So let's see how this maps now by having a look. So here's how relative deprivation, again measured at the individual level, is associated with various health outcomes. So this was taken from an NBR working paper from a few years ago now, and it looked at, so 14.5% of the people in this sample were depressed, 8% were anxious, 18.5% were in fair or poor health, and if you looked at the likelihood of being depressed, when you decrease relative deprivation, I can't remember if it's by 25% or to the 25th percentile, probably by 25%, you get less depressed, if you increase your relative deprivation, you get more depressed, and it affects, in this sample observationally, it affects all of these outcomes. And other work done by these investigators suggests that even after controlling for individual income and a number of other covariates, relative deprivation appears to have a large and statistically significant impact on the probability of dying. And overall, the relative deprivation effect is meaningful. The effect of one standard deviation increase in relative deprivation appears to increase mortality by 39%. And similarly, those that are relatively deprived are also more likely to have high blood pressure, smoke, be overweight, not wear their seatbelts, and so forth. So it just sucks to be lower on the totem pole relative to whatever totem pole is relevant to you. And this is one of the ironies, is that we all have different totem poles in which we find ourselves. Now, I'd like to close with a couple of observations, like by putting a face on some of these differences. This is using some remarkable photographs that were taken by Marcch in his book, Created Equal. And he sort of juxtaposed, it's a beautiful book, a photography book if you're interested. And he juxtaposed images of very disparate sorts of individuals. So on the left, we have a homeless man, Phil Dombrowski, from Los Angeles, California, and the sign that he's carrying says, "Anything could help." And on the right, we have the real estate developer, Gerald Springer, from Houston, Texas. Here on the left, we have company president William Scott from Boston, Massachusetts. And on the right, we have janitor Walter Johnson from Neptune City, New Jersey. Here on the left, we have Amish teenagers Janie Zook and Sam Stoltzfus from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And on the right, we have, quote, punk teenagers Otto Bixler and Brianna Holland from Hollywood, California. And you know, we have so many different ways and so many different positions on the hierarchy, as it were, in our society. And here's one final example of a gradient, just to close with, from a large American sample. This study examined functional health status in over 330,000 Americans who were 55 years of age or older across the full socioeconomic spectrum. And there was a social class gradient showing that respondents with higher incomes have lower levels of functional limitation regardless of how far removed they are from poverty. So all the way up, so this is a percent of poverty line. Across the entire gradient, here if you look at functional limitations for men and for women, and by age, you see that there's a kind of roughly monotonically, but generally declining probability of functional limitations across this whole gradient of income. And there's slight differences by age, so the gradient is steeper for younger ages than it is for older ages. And there were similar findings when educational level was used in place of the poverty index that was used here. So the truth is that this social gradient in which we are all embedded affects all of us, and it affects us across the whole range of the gradient, and it does so because it has affected our bodies, I think, for millions of years. Thank you. See you next time.